All right, guys, new series time. From what I can tell, new series time is everybody's favorite time. Story time seems to do very well on YouTube. I'm not real sure why about that. This is also going to be kind of a new experiment for me. I'm actually recording this on the NoPro and doing the audio with my phone because the mic in the NoPro is terrible, but the NoPro has the best picture and the phone's super shaky and I don't have a tripod mount for it and all that good stuff. But anyway, you don't care about all that. So this is, as near as I can tell, a 1974 Cub Cadet 149. You'll hear me refer to it as the 14 or the 14.9. That is because in the family we have a 10 horsepower, a 12 horsepower, a 14 horsepower, which is what this one is, and I have a 16 horse too. It's a 1650. Two of them are presently owned by my dad. Two of them I have. One my dad has was my grandfather's, and this one was my grandfather's. My grandfather, well, first of all, my grandfather passed away in 1997, so no need for any concern of that or anything. My grandfather bought this thing about 1990-ish, I think. I would have probably been like 10 or 11 years old, and the whole reason he bought it, and that is one of the reasons why we're doing this on the NoPro, is so I can kind of walk you guys around. This is the first one of these I've done live too, so, well, live on film, not just pictures. The reason he bought it is because at the time it had ag tires on it, and if you don't know what that is, if you're not a tractor person, ag tire would be like an agricultural tire, or for regular people, it's a mud tire. So it has, and I still have them, like big knobby mud tires on the back. And we had a lake property in the family. My grandfather had 6 children and built a, it's going to sound opulent, but it wasn't. It was very modest. It was a cinder block building, but what it was a big room with 7 bedrooms around the outside, one for he and my grandmother and one for each of his children. So growing up, just about every weekend, me and all my cousins and everybody, my parents and aunts and uncles and everybody, we'd all go up to the lake. So just about every weekend in the summer, that's what we did, is we went to the lake. So anyway, Grandpa bought this tractor primarily because of those tires it had on the back of it. Why it never occurred to him to just buy other tires for the one he already had, which the 10 horsepower tractor he bought new, I think in 1965. Anyway, I don't know why he didn't do that. Oh, I'll show you another interesting thing quick. The reason I can't confirm the year particularly is because these things wear their serial number down on the rear axle. It's a riveted on tag, and this is no longer the original rear axle. So that's part of the story we'll get to. But anyway, so my grandpa bought this thing because he liked the rear tires. The 10 horse he has is a manual transmission. This one is a hydrostat, so it's an automatic. So if you move the selector forward, the tractor goes forward. You move it backward, it goes backward. Well, the thing about those, and I'll try and insert a picture in here somewhere, is the linkage that runs this stuff wears out over time. There's like a little spring linkage and stuff down in the transmission tunnel where that all bolts together. And when they wear out, these things run away from you. So you'll be going along at whatever speed you want to go, and all of a sudden this thing will just put itself all the way forward. And these things are like psychotically fast for what they are. In fact, when these first came on the market, they were trying to advertise them. Let me back up for a second. It's a Cub Cadet, because there's a big version. There's a Farmall Cub is like the real tractor, as much as real tractor as those are. I think they're like a 30 horsepower. But they're a farm tractor for smaller farm duty. These are the Cadets. So these are supposed to be the smaller but yet built very heavy garden tractor equivalent. So when they first introduced these things, they would have like Cub Cadet, and especially with the hydrostat, people didn't believe in these at all as far as durability. They would have Cub Cadet rodeos where at tractor shows or livestock auctions or wherever you would go to do something like that. They would actually do wheelies with these, jam it all the way in the reverse and just throw it all the way forward, and this thing will straight do a wheelie. I've wheelied it many times, both accidentally and on purpose when I was a kid. Anyway, to get back to the point, so I don't know this for sure, but what my dad has always told me is Grandpa just never could get used to the hydrostat. And I've got a strong feeling the reason why Grandpa could never get used to the hydrostat is because it was always broken. It would always run away on him. It was like that the whole time I knew it, up until a few years back when that stuff was all repaired. The way my dad taught me how to mow on this thing and to mow on his when I was 10 years old is just keep your left hand here at all times and just hang on to this thing. And I mowed with this thing, gosh, probably 20 or 30 hours a month for 5 or 6 years when I was a kid, mowing my dad's property, my grandpa's property, and sometimes it would come back to the house and we'd mow with it. And that's how I did it, with all that linkage all worn out for like thousands of hours. So anyway, I think that's why Grandpa always hated the thing. As soon as he bought it, he took it up the lake, used it there for like a week or two, and brought it back home and took his 10 horse up there. And so this thing was sitting. My dad blew up his 12, and to this day it's still blown up, motor's blown. And this one became the worker around the property, I guess. That is the story of how Grandpa acquired this thing. Now, like I said, Grandpa bought it in about 1990. In 1988, my grandmother died. So from about, 1989 onward, Grandpa pretty much lived at the lake. He pretty much retired to the lake. That's what he wanted to do. And it's not one of those, I guess, kind of high-rolling lake communities. It's more the kind of lake where there's a few trailer courts and some pretty affordable, at least until modern times, pretty affordable small cottages and stuff. So it was the type of place where more, or as many rural people or farmers and stuff would congregate there as anything else. So my grandfather would, I would say at least a few days a week, go over to the little diner in town, which by the way was also a marathon station. If it's still open, I'll see if I can get a street view picture of it if there even is one. But it's a half gas station, half diner, and he'd go over there at, old man hours, 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, whatever, and have breakfast with his buddies. And I think one of his buddies was like a farmer from Ohio, and I think that's who he bought this thing off of. When he bought it with the deck that's on it right now. It's got a 44-inch deck on it. He bought it with a plow, which I think is a 36-inch plow, which I also own. And this tractor had a 3-point lift on the back of it, or Cub Cadet's version of a 3-point on it, which, coming up in this story, I'll tell you why it's not on it anymore, but I do still own that too. God knows what he paid for it, probably too much. I think he paid like $1,000 or $1,100 or something. But anyway, that is all of the history I know on it up until it showed up in the family when I was 10 or 11 years old. And I'm suspecting a few things about that history. I can't be certain. Like I suspect this thing was on a farm because somebody just beat the hell out of it for years. And somebody else beat the hell out of it for years, and that person is me. You put a 10-year-old kid on a tractor that'll do wheelies, and what do you think's going to happen? I was mowing, I think all said and done, most days, probably 5 acres on the thing. It's just like a big open field. So it's not like my dad was out there watching me do it the whole time. He saw me do plenty of stupid stuff, and that goes without saying. If you've been a child, you're going to do stupid things in front of your parents, and you're going to get away with a lot more that they don't see. So I also beat the tar out of this thing as a kid, and for the most part, it survived my abuse. But the abuse of the previous owner, and frankly some of my dad's maintenance too, has been fighting me for ages. Just as an example of that, we'll take the No Pro back over there and show you guys. The front of this thing, if I can get this guy, get my flashlight on. The front of this thing, the front axle, I think you can see them, there's grease zerks in there. And that's to grease those front spindles. Well, those are press-in grease zerks. So a lot of the time they get loose and they don't take grease anymore. And you can't press new ones in. So the right thing to do is just take the spindle out of there, tap the hole, and put a thread-in type zerk in it. And you're done. Well, what the previous owner of this thing did instead was he had one of those zerks that apparently just wouldn't take grease. Drilled a hole down under it and threaded a new zerk in it and left the old one in there. And that zerk that they put in it never did take grease. So basically for the whole time I've owned it anyway, which I got this thing like 10 years ago now, you couldn't grease the front axle. You couldn't grease the spindles. The front axle that is in it now came out of a tractor I bought as a parts tractor. I bought a 1200 that was a piece of junk, and I paid $100 for it with another Kohler 16 horse motor, and it had a manual transmission rear end and a granny gear creeper. So I gave the guy $100 for all this crap and got a bunch of parts for this thing that I needed and made like $300 on it. So that's, that's always cool. That almost never works out for me. But anyhow, so that is the story as I've come to understand it, and interjecting my own assumptions into it that I can't confirm. My grandfather has been dead for 22 years now. About the story of the thing before we owned it. When my dad took over care of it is when I started driving it or mowing with it. This thing is the first vehicle that I drove my dad's 12 a few times, but far and away, this is a vehicle I learned to drive on, make no mistake. But by the time I was 14 and went to driver's ed, I knew how to drive a car. There was no question. As soon as they put me behind the wheel, the instructor's just over there bored. In fact, one of the instructors I had was like, I don't know, probably like 22 or something. She was burning hot, and it was awesome. So we just drive around and chat and shoot the bullshit. He didn't really have anything to say. So anyhow, I pretty much cut my teeth learning to drive on this tractor. My dad used it until, that's another thing. During some of my dad's tenure, the motor kind of halfway blew up. These things are not pressurized engines, so they don't run an oil filter, and they don't have an oil pump. What they are is splash oiling. So on the bottom of the connecting rod on the piston, it comes down the oil pan and just splashes oil up. That's how the cylinder gets lubrication. Well, these motors, and I think some Briggs and Stratton motors and stuff, are a little bit famous that over time, those oil dippers will snap off the bottom of the connecting rod. And when that happens, you don't have any more oil. There's no splash. And that happened to this one. So, gosh, that was probably, I don't know, maybe 94, 93, something like that. We'd had it for a while, but not forever. Motor blew up. Dad pulled the motor out of the thing, put a rod and I think a piston and rings in it, put new Kohler parts in it, and like a head gasket and maybe a couple other gaskets. I think ran a ball hone down through it. And here it is now, like legitimately a couple thousand, if not more, like 4,000 hours of use later. There were several days this thing would be out mowing grass from sun up to sun, just about sun up to sunrise or sundown. Like that every week, really. We had a lot of yard mow, a lot of property mow. So this thing has really been a trooper, but it has also been a piece of garbage ever since I've known it. It was wore right the hell out before Grandpa bought it. It hasn't got any better with time until basically the time I bought it. But I do have a lot of sentimental attachment to this thing. And oh, by the way, if the story of my grandpa bought it because it had tires he liked sounds insane, I've got another short grandpa story for you that is along the same line. It'll kind of tell you a little bit about what kind of man he was. First of all, I absolutely love my grandfather. He was an awesome grandfather. He was he was just a good man. There's a lot of things about myself I wish that I was more like him in a way. Like my grandfather would never tell you what to do. He would phrase things like, if a guy was smart, he might do this, stuff like that. I'm just not that way. I'm much more high strung than my grandfather was. But anyway, so don't take it as me talking shit about my grandfather. Or anyway, there's a story of where he took his car in for an oil change, and he had a '87 Chevy Caprice that was yellow, and it was yellow because my grandmother liked yellow. And if you're paying any attention, Grandma wasn't around for a whole lot of time to appreciate that car. She died in late '88. So Grandpa had this car. It was a nice car, and they took it down the Chevy dealer to have the oil changed in the thing or just have it serviced. And I think they told him that a ball joint or tie rod end or something was out of it. It needed some kind of warranty work or a campaign needed done on this thing or whatever. And my grandfather also was very successful in his career. He was able to retire comfortably. Anyway, so salesman or repairman or whoever says that the car needs work, and he goes, well, how am I going to get home? And what I don't know is, I guess this would have been in, the car was out of warranty. I've got my story wrong because it would have been in 93 is when this happened. So forgive me guys, a little disjointed here. We're going through family history. So this happened in 1993 and there was something wrong in the car. And I don't know if this dealer didn't have a courtesy shuttle or if he'd even bothered to ask. The dealer that he liked to do business with was half an hour from his house. So I don't even know if he asked the question. He just walked in the showroom and said, I'm buying that car, and got out his checkbook and wrote him a check for a brand new 93 Caprice, which was blue, and he hated that car. That was when, when the domestic automakers went from, the boxy bodies and stuff that they'd been building since, the early 70s to the bubble body stuff that we have now. That was like that transition. He absolutely hated it. Hated the styling of it. But my grandfather just walked in and straight up wrote a check for the thing and drove it home and never liked that car. So that's kind of how Grandpa was. He was a little impulsive. I have some of my grandfather's tools. Rarely would you find a complete set of his tools because he'd lose them, which I do too. And he'd just haul off and go buy another set. Never bought a tool that was of any kind of quality at all in his life. He'd buy whatever junk was at the hardware store, and that got him by. But anyway, I'm way off topic now with the history of the tractor. But so my dad was mowing with the thing until 2005, and it blew up the motor. Blew up the rear end. Back in probably about 2000, I had split this tractor, which means that I took the transaxle out of it. So the fenders come off, the rear wheels come off, the drive shaft gets disconnected, and you roll the back of the tractor apart because it had a perpetual transmission fluid leak, and it finally had made me mad. And at the time, my father actually had a broken foot, so he couldn't stop me. I think I was, 19 or 20. I just started college. And so I did. I split the thing and fixed all the leaks and adjusted a bunch of crap and just went around the thing and fixed up a whole lot of stuff while Dad was kind of laid up. And then not too long after that, it started with another transmission leak that my dad never fixed. He just let go. What it was, as you guys will see in another video, there's a suction pipe from the pump to like the sump, or like in a car it would be like the differential. There's a pipe that goes in it that goes up to the hydraulic pump. That thing was leaking. And he let that thing leak for like 6 years. And 6 years on this thing at that time would have been easily 2,000 or 3,000 hours of use. And he also was putting automotive ATF in it to top it off. And whenever he felt like topping it off, it's not like he checked it every time before he mowed or anything. My dad's weird. Some things he's really good about, and some things he's not. And maintaining this thing was just not really a priority for him. But anyway, so he abused the rear end that was in this thing and blew the rear end up to the point where it wouldn't go anywhere anymore. It quit moving. Right about then, my dad had some financial success and bought himself a compact tractor. So my dad now has a nice little John Deere diesel compact tractor with like a 68-inch deck or something on it. And he's got property now in retirement too. In fact, he's mowing more than he's ever mowed right now. He's mowing like 15 acres, something like that, or maybe more. So anyway, he's got a nice compact tractor now. And this thing was just sitting. It's still sitting right where it was the day he killed it. So let's see, fast forward to spring of 2010, I bought my house, and my house had this, which I sold. If you guys are just tuning in now and you've made it this far, first of all, congratulations and thank you. But secondly, the house I'm in right now is a rental. I sold the house I owned to move where I am now for work. But anyway, the house I owned had a walkout basement, which was awesome. And if you're ever going to have a basement, definitely make sure it's a walkout because it makes your life so much better. But there's this psychotically steep hill behind the house that I swear to you has to be at least 30 degrees. Has to be. And straight up, it's just dangerous to mow. It's just flat out dangerous to mow it. No, there's no two ways about it. So when it's time, so I had a push mower when I moved in from the other places I'd rented and stuff, but I wanted a tractor that was good and heavy because that hill I had to mow up and down. It's too steep to mow it sideways. Wanted a tractor that was good and heavy, so I had a chance of the thing not rolling over on itself, which the front end of these things, the front end of this thing, at least in this year, is cast iron, or wait, yeah, that's cast iron. It wouldn't be rusty if it was an aluminum one. A little later on, they went to aluminum. The front axle on this thing is cast iron. This frame on the thing, sorry guys, this frame on the thing is like an 1/8 inch thick. These tractors weigh like 800-900 pounds. I mean, I've read varying sources, but they're heavy, they're beefy. So running this thing up a really steep hill, what I would do to mow that hill is, and I'm a pretty big dude myself, is I would Superman off this thing. I would get on it and hang my legs back and let my feet kind of dangle down behind the deck and lean over the steering wheel as far as I could and just watch those front tires. And if those front tires started coming up, lay off the go power real quick. So anyway, I wanted one of these because my property was hazardous to my health to mow in any other way anyhow. And it didn't even occur to me that this one was available, because it really wasn't. It was broken. I knew it was a piece of garbage, and I knew my dad had been, let's say, lax about maintenance. So I just got on Craigslist, and that's where I found my 1650. It was literally a mile from my house. I went down and met the guy, and dude seemed okay. Warning signs were there of problems to come, but I didn't think about it, and it also kind of didn't matter, because it was like, I don't know, like middle of April or something when I bought it. I had to have something to mow the grass. There wasn't a choice anymore. It was $350. And the market on these tractors is still, for any of them, it's going to be in this type of series and this type of condition, $300 to $600, or maybe even cheaper. They're not worth a whole lot. More on that later. But so anyway, my 1650 had warning signs that I didn't know about and didn't ignore, didn't think about. Mostly it was half low on oil when I bought it. Brought it home. It was almost as big of a piece of garbage as this thing. Needed front wheels almost immediately. It needed, odds and ends, other stuff. I forget now. It's been, almost 10 years ago. I mean, or I guess just over 9. But anyway, it's been quite a while ago. I mowed with it for 2 summers, and during that amount of time, I was buying fun implements and stuff for the 1650 that also go on this one. So I bought a rototiller for it. I bought a snow thrower for it. I bought Cub Cadet OEM rear wheel weights. I bought Cub Cadet chains. I was really getting into this thing and getting into Cub Cadets in general and learning a ton about them, and they're a lot of fun. They're not like a normal garden tractor. These are much more like a bigger tractor, so you can do a little more interesting things with them, or at least more interesting to me. So anyway, right about that time, I'm getting all this stuff, and I had a buddy who was, and probably still is, an obsessive compulsive kind of dude. He would just get waist deep into something, and it would just inhabit his entire life for about 6 months and then move on from it. And through this conversation, or through this time when I was doing all this stuff with my other one, he also has some property, and he has a nice Kubota compact tractor that he mows his property with. And he said, well, I want to get a trim mower. And really, I've seen this before over the years. I've known this guy since I was like 7 years old, and by now we're both in our 30s. Really what he was saying is, you're having a lot of fun with this thing. I want to have fun with one too. And I said, okay. He's been a good friend to me over the years. He's helped me out a lot. I said, okay. Tell you what, my dad has offered to sell me the 14, which it still ran, or allegedly ran, but it's got a blown up rear end in it. I'll tell you what, I will buy the thing, and I'll buy the parts to make the thing right, and I'll give that to you as a birthday gift. So at this time, my 16 was running, this thing wasn't. So I bought the tractor and the plow, non-operational, from the estate, my grandfather's estate. So basically here, I bought them from my dad for $275, non-operational. I drove 2 hours to pick up a rear end for it, and that's also the same guy I got the turf tires that are on the back of it now. Paid $75 for the rear end, and I think $50 for the tires. Brought all this stuff over to, power washed everything, brought it all over to my buddy's house, And he starts tearing into the thing, and he's like, well, it needs points, and it needs steering linkage, and it needs a tune-up kit, and it needs this, and it needs that, and it needs this, and it needs that. Well, by the time this was done, I had like $500 in this birthday gift for my buddy, which again, he was a good friend. He'd helped me out a lot. It was starting to hurt, but I would say at the end of it, I was all right with it. You know, it was a nice gift for him. The thing didn't get sold to somebody that I didn't know, and you know, it was still around. I have a sentimental attachment for it. So okay, fine. So he puts the thing together, and he's like, this thing doesn't really seem to mow that well. And the reason it didn't mow that well is, you guys will see more of this on another video, but see that yellow arm coming down there into the white stuff? Those are the lift arms for the mowing deck, and those are held on with shear pins. So they're held on with sacrificial pins that are designed to break off if something bad happens, and one of them was broken. That's why it mowed crappy. But rather than fix it, or I don't know if it was even a conscious thing on his mind, right about that time is when the motor in my 1650 blew up, because I suspect it broke that dipper off the oil pan as well. And it actually broke the crank in the motor. So it was down for the count. I was working like 55 hours a week at work. I was making good money, but I was busy. So what I did is I bought that other motor from that dude on Craigslist for $50. I just took it down to the local machine shop and said, rebuild it. And the guy looked at me like I was insane. He's like, this can be like $1,000 for us to do it. I'm like, do it. And I don't have time to mess with this. And through all the other stuff on that tractor I'd already repaired, including the new wheels and all kinds of other crap, I was already into the other one for like $1,000 at that point. So I was like, whatever, the money's already gone, you know, the gambler's fallacy. So anyway, while all this is getting done, I'm going over to my buddy's house every week and borrowing this thing to mow my grass. And, you know, I take it back every week with full tank of gas and cleaned up and greased up and ready to go for the next time and all that crap. And he's pretty cool about it. And then the conversation of, well, this thing cuts kind of weird and I don't really know, you know. Oh, and he's also the one that welded up the linkage that was worn out on the hydrostat linkage. So it doesn't run away from you anymore on the directional control. He fixed all that stuff while he was in there. And he swapped the rear end into it that's in it now. Or I helped him do it. But anyway, so he did a bunch of work on this thing. I paid for a whole bunch of parts. I used it for a month or two. He's like, yeah, I don't really think I want this anymore. I'm going to sell it. I'm like, you know, I'm not going to tell you that didn't make me angry. You know, it's, you know, giving my buddy this $500 birthday gift. You know, it's not like he's, it's not like we're sleeping in the same bed. You know, this is just a pal. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to sell it. And I just kind of got pissed. And at that point, I was needing to mow my grass anyway. I said, well, if you're going to sell it, you're going to sell it back to me. You're not going to sell my grandpa's tractor. Sell it to me. I need it anyway. And he came up with a pretty low number on it, but I think it was still like $300, $300 or $350. I don't really even remember anymore. So before I ever actually cut one blade of grass with this thing under my ownership, I had about $800 in it. And that is when it became mine. I mowed grass with it at my previous property for, well, I guess I mowed with the 1650 for 2 years. So I mowed for 7 years with this thing. Every spring, and I tried to do that on the 1650 too before it totally erupted, is every spring I would go and try and address something on this thing that was messed up and try and make it better. And I don't remember all the details of all of the springs come and gone. You know, a lot of times it was, you know, money limited or whatever. You know, like, you know, one year wheel bearing was out of it and I didn't have another $4 to buy a second one. So I just could put one wheel bearing in it. It's what I could afford. So old Max has had some ups and downs in his life. But anyway, what I can do pretty easily is take you guys through the stuff I did last year, because that is all pretty fresh on my mind. Just had some technical issues, so I think we're just going to finish this on out with the phone. But things I did do it last year. I did all these little steering ball joint guys. They were all worn out. There are 4 of them. There's one on each side and then one on each end of the column. Replaced those. This is the PTO clutch that applies power to your implements, so like the mowing deck and stuff like that. This is an automotive style clutch. A lot of garden tractors, in fact, that's the only garden tractor I know of that isn't that way, run like a idler on the pulley that you just engage that idler and then the motor starts driving it. Not this thing. This thing runs a straight up real clutch. As a consequence of that, that thing was like $200. You can rebuild them yourself. The kits to rebuild them are like $100. I was running out of time and just ordered it from a dude on eBay that rebuilds them. It seems like it's been okay. Did that, and that little brass button is what applies pressure to the middle of it. That'd be like your slave cylinder, like an internal bellows style slave cylinder on a automotive car, or your throw-out bearing. That's what this is on this thing. I'm not a big fan of those brass ones, by the way. I think when that one wears out, I may go to back to a stock Cub Cadet style one. As a consequence of that clutch being bad, or what actually it was, is there's a bearing behind this clutch that when it's disengaged allows it to freewheel. That bearing is actually what failed, but in the process of removing this thing, I actually broke the disc inside the original one I had. So that's the disc. You can just see it back in there. I broke the disc, so that whole clutch assembly is in need of rebuild now anyway, so I'm glad I had this one. But anyway, so you'd go to start the thing and the deck would start turning. As a consequence of that, the starter generator on the thing got to be where it wouldn't crank it anymore. And same story, I had at this time just sold my house or put my house on the market. This was like May. And up to that point I was paying somebody like $50 a week, or basically like $250 a month to mow the grass where I'm at. So I just started throwing money at this thing. I ordered a brand new Chinese starter generator for this thing that was defective out of the box. So took the original one down, or my dad took it down to the starter repair shop for me and got it rebuilt, and it was also $100, same price as the Chinese one. Highly recommend, if you got one of these, just have your original one rebuilt, save yourself the trouble. So it got that. It got the steering, or the speed linkage, also runs two little tie rod end things that are like $30 a piece. I replaced those last year. In the process of doing that, I had to take the fenders off. And while I was doing that, apparently I wired this is the voltage regulator, because that is a generator up there. It's so it needs an external regulator like this, and this is actually an automotive style one. That's what you would find in like a 55 Chevy. Anyway, in the process of putting that back together, I apparently put those wires on wrong. And like most things, you assume you put the wires on wrong, you're going to see smoke or it won't work. Not the case with this thing. What happened was it just wouldn't charge and it would deplete the battery. And I mistakenly thought that that was bad. So that is a new one. The original one, these rubber isolation straps, which are also the ground, were all broken. And just 45 years old. So it was time to just get a new one on it anyway. So despite my ignorance on that, what else we do? Oh yeah, I actually have two 55-inch decks. This is the 44-inch deck, or not 55, I wish. They're 50s. That's the biggest deck they made for these. I have two of those. And I got one of those pretty much all rebuilt and ready to go, and realized it was missing like a critical component underneath that gets welded on that I didn't have. And I also did not have a welder, and right now I do have a welder, but I don't know how to use it. So I rebuilt that, and then immediately had to halfway rebuild this thing to start using it. In the process of doing that, I put that black pulley down there is the drive pulley that drives the deck from the engine. The one that's on it there is a speed up pulley. It's like an inch smaller than the factory or the stock one. I guess as the story goes, the EPA or OSHA or Public Safety Administration, I don't know, back in like the Nixon era, I guess, there was like a campaign for lawn tractors or something, that they were either too loud or they were throwing rocks and killing kids or something. And the stories I've heard it is they mandated that they reduce the deck speeds. Well, this thing has always like clogged up the deck and cut like crap and everything else, because that pulley was too small. Later on, Cub Cadet released that speed up pulley, which is the way it should have been to begin with, and some of the early model ones were that way, and you could buy it. And I bought one for the 1650 for, I don't know, 40 bucks or something. Well, when it came time to buy one for this one, they were discontinued, no longer available. So the only way I could buy one was new old stock, and it was like $100. I'm sure oh yeah, I had to partially rebuild the carburetor on this thing last year. I did a whole bunch of work on it. I was at my dad's house for like a 4-day 4th of July weekend. Spent 4 or 5 days just hammering on it. Went back, I think, a weekend each way, working on the thing. So I worked on this thing for like 7 days. I swapped out that front axle too. I told you the bad one. The old one was bad. I swapped out the front axle and spindles for a good used unit. Front axle came off at 1200. It's the exact same part. This one's just not as smoked. This is, I know, going to be a very long video, but keep in mind we're not just talking about the history of this thing and the history of what I've done with it. We're actually talking about the history of my family. So my grandpa owned it. He hated it, but he still owned it. A very good friend of mine also had a hand in this thing at one point. So, you know, it's got that history in it too. So yeah, it's kind of a long story, like all my stuff. But to cut to the chase here, because I've kind of done this in I think the other 2 introduction videos, is, you know, should you buy one of these if you've stumbled across this video and you're thinking about it, and that's why you're here. My answer to that is, it's twofold, okay? If you have enough money to buy a nice one of these, and when I say nice, I mean it has to have been properly, fully restored. And when I say restored, I mean basically rebuilt, like every bearing, every screw has been turned on the thing, which there are a lot of guys that do that as a hobby with these things. They are gonna want like $2 to $3 grand for one in that kind of shape. These things in this kind of shape, like this one, I know the new parts I've put on it and everything. I've got like $2 grand in this tractor as it sits, and I'm unlikely to restore it. It's always going to be a worker bee. It'll be ugly. I'd like to put the grill back in it though. But anyway, these things are, and again, I'm not sure what got cut before or not, but you can pick these things up on at least condition that appears to be in this kind of shape, you know, rusty and dented, but operates for like 400 bucks. These things were built to last a lifetime when they were new. The problem you have with that now in 2019 is that they've lasted a lifetime. You know, this is a 45-year-old tractor, and you can buy them older than this by like 15 years. So when you get one, it is going to be roached. It is going to be beat to death. The parts for them are expensive if you buy Cub Cadet parts, and typically the Cub Cadet parts are good quality, but the brand has changed hands like 3 times since these were new. MTD owns them now, and now they're like a department store grade tractor. You can go down to Home Depot and buy a Cub Cadet tractor of this approximate size for, I don't know, 1,500 bucks or something. When these things were new, they were like $3,000 or $4,000 in that era's money. So in 1974, this thing was probably like a $3,000 tractor. Just for reference, my dad bought a brand new, fully optioned out 4x4 GMC truck in 1974, and the invoice on that truck was 4,600 bucks. So in modern money, everything doesn't scale the same. New cars have gone up like threefold the way the rest of the market has. But assume that a stripped down half-ton 4x4 truck today is, let's say, 30 grand. Let's say you can roll down to the Chevy dealer and pick up a 4x4 bare bones Silverado for 25 or 30 grand. In equivalent money, you're talking about it like a compact tractor today that you'd be spending 20 grand. So these things were very, very expensive when they were new. They were very high quality, and they held up. They are wonderful machines. But unless you buy one for several $1,000s that somebody else has put several $1,000s into, it is probably going to be a piece of crap. I like these tractors. I have a sentimental attachment to this one. I've got too much money in each of the ones I own to ever really bother to part with them. Because again, if I put this on Craigslist, it'd be $400. And you know, it's worth more to me to own it than it is to get $400 back out of my couple grand. So to answer the question, should you buy one? My answer is pretty strongly no. If you are curious about them and you just want to play, you can buy these things non-running for like $100. Like I said, I bought one with a blown up motor. The motor is actually out of it, so what's not included, for $50. And parts of that tractor are on this one right now. Like Harbor Freight motors and stuff don't really fit them well. You can cut the frames up to do it, so that's not really a good idea. But if you buy one that has got a running motor in it, or you buy a running motor that came out of a generator or a boat or whatever, these Kohler motors were used in all kinds of stuff, you can put one together cheap and go play. Or if you buy 3 or 4, you can take good parts off of them. But to buy one of these and restore one because you think it'll be cool or valuable or whatever, you are looking at a hard time, because you flat out cannot buy new parts anymore for a lot of the tractor. Like I said, you can't even buy that deck drive spindle anymore. You have to find one new old stock or find a used one, and they're hard to find, and you're not going to be the only guy looking. There's everything you buy for it is $1 bajillion. Like I said, I replaced those directional control ball joints, and they were stupid expensive, like 30 or $50 a piece. I think they were $50 a piece. And they're specialized weird thread and everything else. Maybe you could have got some on the master car, maybe not. But yeah, basically, unless you already have one of these and want to work on it, I would suggest you do not go get one. Or, I guess, temper your expectations. If you decide you want to play with something like this and you go get one for $50, you know, if you got 300 in it and it still isn't doing what you want it to do, stop. So where I do think these would be great, but this is really true of anything from this era, is I think these would be good, like father-son, single car garage kind of projects, because you can blast one of these things apart entirely. You can split it and get that rear axle out of it. You can take the fenders off. You can take the front axle out. You can take the motor off. You can do that all pretty comfortably in about that much space. In a one-car garage, you can blast one of these things apart as much as you want and go after it. But you can also do that with something that's more affordable to work on, less cumbersome to find parts for. Or on the flip side of that, these are in many ways more complicated than those machines. I said in a video, for me that's in the past, for you will be in the future, these are also shaft drive. There's no drive belt for the tractor itself. It runs a drive shaft like a car. That PTO clutch is a real clutch like a car. These are flathead motors, so they don't have a hydraulic cam, but a lot of stuff's flathead and doesn't have a hydraulic cam. So there are lifters that you can adjust, need adjusted, stuff like that, that if you were to buy like a 10 or 15-year-old like Murray, is the same kind of project, stuff you probably wouldn't have access to play with. So if you're looking for like a learning demonstration tool for somebody that wants, you and your kid or whatever, well, these things are great, but just be aware. Parts are costly. They're tough to find sometimes. But on the flip side of that, there are tractor shows, especially where I'm at, the Midwest. They have tractor shows every summer. And guys get together and bring spare parts and new old stock stuff and everything else out. So if you want to go to the tractor shows and all that stuff and pound the swap meet and everything, that's also a fun hobby. You can do that. That's not really my style. I'm much more this thing's broken, let's fix it because I got stuff to do. But anyway, I got a feeling this thing is probably getting to be about 40 minutes long. Analytics have showed me that everybody loves story time, but there might be a limit to that. So I'm going to cut it off. If you have any questions or anything about this thing, feel free to ask. I'll try and answer as well as I can. There is a really good Cub Cadet community out there. I think there's a bunch of guys on the All Tractors forum. There's only Cub Cadets. There are very good knowledge resources out there. I don't want to say anything specifically about any one thing or another, but some of those dudes are a little less receptive to newbies. I get the impression that they're probably all of the generation that may have bought these originally and maybe don't take well to, let's say, the YouTube generation. So bear in mind, if you go over there, they might yell at you like, hey, go over to the shop manual section and look that stuff up. And you know what? They're right. But if kind of hanging out in the shop is more your style, you may not like that. I don't know. Anyway, thanks for stopping by, guys. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you later.